In the months after my husband disclosed an extramarital relationship, I was almost obsessed with the question, how did we get here? I was so desperate to make sure we would never be in this place again. Eventually, we had to start peeling back our own patterns, the ways we were ping-ponging off each other in relationship, but even more importantly, the way we each emotionally responded to our own stuff. And since I ultimately had no control over his choices, I had to start with my own self, my own patterns. That's what this video is about. How do I heal old patterns in relationship, especially after betrayal? And I'm going to give you 3 imperative questions to ask yourself that can really change everything. The truth is, even the best or smoothest relationships devolve into unconscious patterns without effort and awareness. It's just what we do as humans. We find ways of coping with life that feel comfortable to us, and we stick with those strategies over time, often not even realizing that we're coping. And when we're in relationship, those patterns collude together, and we often prop each other up in our dysfunction without even knowing it. And it's always easier to see a pattern in somebody else. So let's look at some of our favorite couples from the ages. How about The Simpsons? Homer and Marge. We've got the childlike avoider versus the over-responsible caretaker. Homer acts out, Marge compensates. It's been like 30 years and Marge is still over-functioning and Homer is still sitting on the couch eating donuts. Or maybe you're more like this famous duo from The Office, Michael Scott and Toby. Their pattern is projection versus silent endurance. Michael scapegoats, Toby absorbs, and there's no repair. Or how about George and Jerry, the detached observer versus the neurotic spiral? Jerry enables, George panics, nothing changes. While most of us love watching these entertaining dynamics play out, it's not as much fun to be caught in them ourselves. So like I said, without some real awareness, effort, and intention, most long-term relationships are destined to devolve into some sort of dysfunctional pattern. Think about it. Is it true for you? How about your parents if they're still married? It can be hard to find a long-term relationship that's really thriving. So that can sometimes beg the question, is marriage the problem? And while I recognize that marriage may not be for everyone, I don't see marriage as the problem. In fact, I believe that long-term relationship is one of the greatest opportunities we have to develop ourselves as evolved human beings. Why is that? Because long-term relationships inevitably expose the ways we're stuck in our own limiting beliefs and the coping strategies we've learned to protect ourselves. It's a lot easier to posture ourselves and compartmentalize when we're interacting with the greater world. But in our closest relationships, our facades eventually come undone or come to a head. In other words, marriage doesn't make people unconscious or unhappy. It exposes the unconsciousness or unhappiness that we already carry within us. And in my view, that's what makes marriage an incredible vehicle to continue to see ourselves more clearly, take ownership of our own stuff, and evolve into more awake, loving, and healthy individuals. And I love the mantra here, life isn't here to make you happy. It's here to wake you up. I believe that wholly. And in my experience, I would say that life and relationships are actually happiest when we allow them to be part of our waking up process, which is usually going to be uncomfortable. And here I want to say, if you've experienced betrayal in any way in your long-term relationship, figuring this stuff out feels like more than a luxury. It feels like an absolute crisis, and in some ways it is. When the relationship hits a rock bottom, it forces us to wake up and realize something has to change. Even though this sucks in so many ways, and I don't ever want to downplay the intensity of this experience, the fact that it's exposing the stuff that's needed to change is a gift. If you're both willing to do the work, it becomes an opening for a new path forward that's built on a much, much stronger foundation. So this is the big why behind the 3 questions I want to offer you today. So the definition of an unconscious pattern here is a type of interaction that allows both partners to retreat back to their emotional comfort zone. It's like we've signed a secret contract. I won't make you look at your stuff if you won't make me look at mine. And we grow more separate, more isolated, and more like a victim in our comfortable narrative over time. What do I mean by our comfortable narrative? I mean that when we're living unconsciously, we're always trying to frame whatever's happening or whatever we're feeling into a narrative we can live with. And when we look closely at it, it's usually a narrative that paints us as the victim or the less guilty party involved. So the first question I want you to ask yourself is, what is my relationship narrative? In the story I'm telling myself, how am I positioning myself? How am I positioning my partner? In what way is this narrative serving my ego or my own comfort? If you can start to identify the narratives that are keeping you safe or feeling either under-responsible or over-responsible, you're going to be one big step closer to disrupting your own dysfunctional pattern. The second question I want you to ask yourself is, how do I know when I've hit my personal wall? Now, what do I mean by a wall? I mean the emotional point of no return, where we metaphorically pack up our bag and stop honestly engaging with our partner. How do you know when you've hit your wall? What do you start to do? There's 2 typical patterns: retreat, which might look like withdraw, avoid, isolate, or attack, chase, fawn, or attack. Once you can kind of conceptually identify what your pattern typically is, I want you to start investigating how that pattern feels in your mind, your body, your spirit. For example, my pattern is typically a chase pattern where I start getting really fixated on what my partner's thinking or feeling, and I get sucked into mapping his energy and kind of lost in his orbit. And then I lose a sense of myself. And I feel it in kind of this desperate and clingy energy that I feel around my heart and even in my shoulders and face. It's like this very scared, overwhelmed part of me that's trying so hard and is so scared to let people down or disappoint someone or lose connection. And it kind of feels like drowning. Now notice, as I'm describing this, I'm not going into the why I'm doing this at all. That's going to push me back into a different part of my brain, the logical problem-solving part, and that's not really what I'm going for here. I want to stay in this observing awareness part of my brain. So I'm focusing on what I'm feeling and where I'm feeling it in my body. And as I keep my focus here, I grow more and more detached from the problem itself, and it kind of loses its hold on me. It's really cool to start to experience this. And now the third question I want you to ask yourself is this: what is this pattern doing for me? And the chances are that this pattern is trying to protect me in some way, because these patterns come from our subconscious, and our subconscious is hooked into our survival brain. So there's almost always some gut level protective function. What am I trying to protect myself from? From taking accountability? From feeling an emotion I don't want to feel? From facing a part of myself I don't want to face? And just notice how all of these self-protective functions have almost nothing to do with the other person at all. They're protecting me from my own feelings, from the stuff I can't or don't want to tolerate in myself. So these 3 questions are so powerful because they are self-referencing, which means they give you full ownership and really empower you to start to improve your relationships and break your patterns, even if your partner isn't doing anything at all. If this is resonating and you're realizing that these patterns didn't come from nowhere and that insight alone hasn't been enough, I want to share a free resource with you. I offer a masterclass called How to Break Dysfunctional Cycles, where we go deeper into how these patterns form, why they repeat, and what actually helps interrupt them, especially after betrayal or relational trauma. It's completely free and you can watch it in your own time.